It's my great honor to introduce a colleague and friend and one of the great conservationists I've had the opportunity to know in my career. I first got to know Wendy Paulson, it's almost 25 years ago, I'd say, when Wendy was working in Illinois organizing the Chicago wilderness area at that time, a coalition of many local organizations to protect and restore open space in the Chicago area. Wendy got involved with the Nature Conservancy when I was there, and she was actually planting native prairies. Anybody ever plant native prairies before? Wendy knows how to do it. She's quite an expert at it, where a lot of these warblers need habitat. When Wendy then became vice chair of the Nature Conservancy's Board of Governors, 10 years ago moved to New York City. There you go. Keep those birds going. All right. Before this is over, everybody has to press theirs at one time, and then we're going to have an aviary in here. All right? When Wendy came to New York, she regretted leaving Illinois, but she got so involved in things in New York, doing bird walks in Central Park all the time, became active with Audubon, volunteering with a wonderful program called For the Birds, where Wendy went into classrooms in the South Bronx teaching young teenagers about birds in the city. Now, that's no small task. I've watched Wendy in a classroom of 14, 15-year-old, mostly African-American teenagers in the South Bronx teaching them about birding, and she had them transfixed. This is no small accomplishment. It was really quite amazing, and she now has a whole team of volunteers that go out into schools all around New York City teaching learning skills through birds throughout. It was her program and did an absolutely fabulous job. And now that Wendy's in Washington, she's leading birding walks here in Rock Creek Parkway and doing the same thing. She is the chair of the board of directors of RARE, a wonderful international organization that we partner with extensively. Still active with the Nature Conservancy State Program, former chair of the New York State Board, the Illinois State Board, a board of trustees of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and a whole long list of other things. And someone who walks the walk. She not only knows about it, but she does it every day as a volunteer, as a leader, as a professional teacher. We're honored to have you with us today, Wendy. Please come up.
Thanks, John, so much. It's really great. I miss seeing John in Central Park, because we very often would run into each other. Central Park tends to be one of those places in the middle of the city where you cross paths regularly. So I'm delighted to be here today, delighted to have so many of you join us. And anytime anybody wants to punctuate the talk with one of your bird calls, that would be just fine. I've been asked by the Audubon team to give a personal perspective on my experience with neotropical birds. It's an especially fun assignment for me because I actually started paying serious attention to birds when I lived in Washington 35 years ago. My husband and I lived in Great Falls at the time, and the house that we rented came with a green platform bird feeder that was outside the dining room window, and I loved learning to identify the birds that came to the seed that I put there. I was teaching at the Potomac School at the time, and I used dozens of acres of the wooded campus there as an extension of the classroom for my second graders. We found a pair of barred owls in the woods, a species I knew nothing about, and used to go out after lunch to look for them, often with success. Little by little, I was waking to the world of birds. On weekends, my husband and I sometimes went to Assateague Island. One September, we met a team of raptor biologists banding peregrine falcons. My husband had been keenly interested in birds of prey since childhood. I knew next to nothing about them. But the biologists' enthusiasm for their work and their eagerness to share their knowledge arrested my interest. I returned many times to help them in their search for the magnificent peregrines as they headed to South America for the winter. Because it was the early 70s and the peak of the DDT crisis, the peregrines were few and far between. But there were thousands of shorebirds on the move: sandpipers, plovers, dunlin, turnstones, oyster catchers, dowitchers. My head spun with the spectacle of wheeling shorebird flocks and the confusion of mixed species. But I had patient teachers. I was totally hooked. That winter I was not teaching, as we were expecting our first child. I took long walks and began to notice birds I'd never seen before. A neighbor loaned me his powerful camera lens to photograph waterfowl at Roach's Run near the airport. I took several classes at the Audubon Naturalist Society on bird identification. The miracle of migration was beginning to dawn on me. When spring arrived, my husband and I headed to Pennyfield Lock on the C&O Canal to see if we could find some of the birds I was learning about, birds that had spent the winter in the tropics, in the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, even as far away as Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay. The larger birds I could identify easily: scarlet tanager, Baltimore oriole, rose-breasted grosbeak, barn swallow. The smaller neotropical migrants, I'd begun to use that term by then, were more challenging, but I was determined. Before long, I was identifying vireos and warblers and was completely, irretrievably captivated by the challenge. Somehow, I thought those migrants passed only along the C&O Canal. That was a magic corridor as I saw it. Then something interesting happened. I had begun to learn bird songs after a surreal walk with Chandler Robbins, author of The Golden Guide to North American Birds, and I began to hear songs in our Great Falls yard. We had wonderful tall oaks, and one day I distinctly recall thinking, my gosh, that's a redstart, and I think I hear a black-throated green warbler. It seems foolish to me now, but such was my ignorance that I had not realized that the same birds that were streaming along the C&O corridor were also passing through the treetops of Great Falls and anywhere else they could find food and rest in their dramatic northward journey each spring. Such was the beginning of what has been a 35-year captivation with these extraordinary feathered creatures. Wherever I have lived, wherever I travel, they have become to me very special, very beautiful, and immensely interesting wild neighbors, or in many instances, longtime friends briefly stopping in during their twice-annual journey between northern latitudes and the tropics. In appreciation of my early teachers, I began to lead bird walks when I moved to Illinois and had become acquainted with the bird life and migration patterns there. I did the same, as John mentioned, in New York City's Central Park, which I might add is one of the world's best places to learn about migratory songbirds. They drop into the park abundantly and are easy to see. If I have only one day each spring to go birding, I'd probably opt for Central Park. Just recently, as John also mentioned, I completed a series of walks in the Potomac Gorge in Rock Creek Park. It was in many ways a wonderful homecoming to the roots of my interest in birds. But for me, birds go well beyond the walks in search of them, as pleasurable as those are. They have brought an unspeakable richness to daily living. When I wake to the ethereal, flute-like song of the wood thrush here in Washington, I can feel nothing but joy. When I gaze at the neon orange and black and white pattern on the diminutive Blackburnian warbler, fresh from the forests of Columbia, I marvel at the beauty and feel deep wonder at the journey of that half-ounce jewel from the South American jungle to the boreal forests of Canada. Birds have been a source of friendships, new exposures, rich experiences. They have been the impetus for travel, hiking, study, writing, sketching, and teaching. As I have traveled to different parts of the world, they have served as an international language, a bond with naturalists in other countries. When a new friend in Colombia shows me a green and gold tanager in his country, we both feel the same thrill at the utterly unique combination of design and color. When we find a great crested flycatcher, we both know that the bird is spending the dry season, our winter, in the tropics and will fly north for the summer to breed in the temperate zone. One of hundreds of species that travel centuries-old migratory routes and stitch together our hemisphere year after year. And we know that what happens to the bird's habitat on both ends of that journey will determine its appearance to future students of nature. I think that ultimately, it is that eternal continuity that migratory birds represent that makes them such unique emblems of the natural order. Their age-old movements over hundreds and thousands of miles represent a stable phenomenon in an often unstable world. I was living in New York City in 2001 and was in Central Park with good friends on September 11th watching fall migrants. We still try to reune each year in the park on that day because for each of us, the inevitable push of the migrants was an undeniable affirmation of life and vitality. And there is another important quality that birds represent to me, that is beauty. I think of them as among nature's masterpieces. There have been so many moments in my experience when I have stood utterly rapt at the sheer loveliness of birds, at the way a hooded warbler's face glows from its black hood, or the way a painted bunting seems to carry every color of the rainbow in its plumage. In the years I taught bird classes for Audubon in the New York City public schools, the most meaningful moments were those when children raised in tough neighborhoods among pigeons, house sparrows, and starlings underwent a metamorphosis similar to mine as they opened their eyes and hearts to the unexpected loveliness of blue jays, great blue herons, and Baltimore Orioles in Central Park. Witnessing again and again their sense of discovery and delight, I couldn't help but think that if we all came to know and really see and begin to understand these natural works of art, our inner reservoirs of wonder, appreciation, harmony, beauty, joy, peace would expand and deepen and bless one another and our planet. Our world needs beauty. It needs affirmations of life. It needs winged thought. Migratory birds represent these qualities. Year after year, century after century, they have brought beauty, vitality, dynamic movement to this planet. But they need advocates. Their homes, their winter and summer habitats, and the important refueling spots like the C&O Corridor and Rock Creek Park are not always guaranteed. On their twice-yearly migratory journeys, they face the threat not only of dwindling habitat, but windows, cell towers, night-lit buildings, trapping for caged bird trade, insecticide poisons, predatory cats, and more recently, man-induced climate change. Since the years I was here in the early 70s, there has been a steady decline for many species of migratory songbirds. The wood thrush, which many of you are wearing on your name tags, is one example. At a meeting of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology last week, I learned that data collected over 5 decades shows that the species has declined by over 50% since the 60s. The bobolink, also on some of your name tags, has fared even worse. Its numbers have plummeted by over 90% in the same time frame. I don't intend to end on a discordant note. I am by nature hopeful. I've worked for over 20 years on grassland restorations in my home state of Illinois, and I'm wonderfully encouraged by the return of bobolinks, Henslow's sparrows, and other declining grassland species to restored habitat. But I also don't want to minimize the need that migratory birds and other species have for thoughtful advocacy and action. Air, water, forest, marshlands know no political boundaries, and neither do migratory birds. They need protective attention at both ends of their migratory routes and all along the way. Though bobolinks may find increased breeding habitat in prairie restorations, that will not matter much if they face crops laced with DDT and other pesticides in their wintering grounds. Conversely, while pintails and other waterfowl may enjoy sufficient wintering habitat, the destruction of wetlands in North America will signal their decline. I am forever grateful to my early tutors for the awakening that I experienced to the beauty, complexity, diversity, and dynamics of birds, and subsequently to the wider natural world. It was only a next logical step to feel a desire to help those species continue to flourish, to maintain their unique and irreplaceable niche in the natural order. As an individual dedicated to the protection and stewardship of wild species and landscapes, I appreciate and salute the constructive and critical role played by the Congressional International Conservation Caucus and the International Conservation Caucus Foundation. I feel hopeful that as we all, individually and collectively, work as advocates and ambassadors and activists in support of international conservation efforts, today's children and their grandchildren will inherit a world where tropical and temperate landscapes continue to host wood thrushes, bobolinks, western tanagers, and where they also can watch and learn and wonder at the diversity of life on Earth. And I thought before we get to Alberto that we would just do a quick run through, kind of a virtual greeting line, if you don't mind, just a visual one if we have time. Do we have time to do that? Okay, many of you have the wood thrush. This is a great species that winters in Central America that continues to live and breed in many of the ravines in Rock Creek Park. Here we go. I forgot about this. See if this works. So there was a delay, so. Maybe here we go. The bobolink, one of my favorites. The Midwesterners among you probably have bobolinks on your tags and may have the plush toy. One of the really wonderful long-distance flyers. Yeah, you can play the bobolink. Spink, spank, spink, spank, spink. It's a grassland breeder down by such great numbers, but as I said, beginning to come back with grassland restorations. The western tanager, for those of you from western habitats, a mountain bird. And I just had an email and photograph from one of my best friends in Colorado the other day that she took of a western tanager that just had arrived outside her kitchen window. Barn swallow, these nest in the Washington area. They are one of the great, they have a huge range throughout almost all of Central America and throughout North America. If you walk across the bridge at Teddy Roosevelt Island, you're guaranteed to see barn swallows swooping beneath you. The peregrine falcon, one of the birds that was very critical or very important in my own awakening to the bird world. Just a magnificent raptor, the fastest clocked species on Earth that dives at more than 200 miles an hour. And the wonderful scarlet tanager, a cousin of the western tanager, but it's an eastern counterpart that we actually see here in the Washington area, and it does breed here. So you have a good chance of seeing scarlet tanagers in this area. The rose-breasted grosbeak, related to the cardinal, you can tell by that big fat bill. Again, a winter in Central America and northern South America. The wonderful Baltimore oriole, named for the vestments of Lord Baltimore, those orange and black duds that it wears. And one of the most beautiful, weaver of the most beautiful nests. They make these wonderful pouch-shaped nests and breeds quite abundantly. One of the best places to see them is at the Great Falls Visitors Tavern along the C&O Canal. For those in the west, the yellow-headed blackbird, a breeder of marshes. And I always think of its call as like a trumpeter that suddenly got into stage fright. It was kind of going. Indigo bunting, just almost an indescribable blue, fairly common in the Washington area, particularly outside the city and in grasslands. And this is the one that I mentioned that carries all the colors of the rainbow, the painted bunting. A bird that is actually threatened a lot by the captive bird trade. It's trapped as pets, and just a beautiful species. And one of my favorite warblers, the hooded warbler, because one nests near my home in Illinois, and they're just wonderful, wonderful warblers. These are the little neotropical migrant warblers. These are the half-ounce ones. We're down to half-ounce birds that travel thousands of miles every year. The black-throated blue warbler. Aww. It's been working just fine. There we go. The little oven bird, the teacher. If you're walking in Rock Creek Park, they're actually nesting right now. They waddle there. It's a ground warbler. The blackpoll warbler, which holds one of the long-distance flying records, it goes down as far as northern, I guess Brazil, maybe Argentina, but 6,000 miles. This little thing that if somebody calculated, if you were to transfer the energy use into miles per gallon, it gets 750,000 miles to the gallon. And the Blackburnian warbler with its flame-throated colors, I just figure if somebody sees that bird, they're going to love birding forever. It's just, and then the last one, the little ruby-throated hummingbird, which also nests in the area. This little dynamo that crosses the Gulf of Mexico, 600 miles nonstop, along with many, but it's just such a jewel. So thank you very much, and I think, John, you're going to introduce Alberto.